Hello, and welcome to a Yin Yoga podcast. If you're new around here, welcome. Thanks for coming to join me. If you're familiar, welcome back, my friends. Speaking of that, if you are familiar, if you've been listening to episode after episode and you've been getting a lot out of these episodes, you've been benefiting from this information, could you please do me the honor of either reviewing it? If you have not yet offered a review, you could just pause this right now. I won't mind, I'll wait. And go into either your Apple or your Spotify. You can offer 5 stars. In Apple, you can also add a written review. In Spotify, you can leave comments. So if you had a favorite episode, you can always leave me comments under that, and that is also greatly appreciated. If you're not listening to this on Apple or Spotify and you want to give me some feedback, you can always just get me on Instagram, either by sharing an episode in your stories and tagging me or sending me a DM. Also, recently I had somebody, which was quite lovely, reach out in just a random spontaneous gratitude post in the Yin Yoga network about the pod. And that was lovely to not only read her feedback, but also the folks that joined in underneath as well. So, sharing is caring, as they say. And another way that you could share this, if you've already offered a review, is to take a screenshot, share it in your Instagram stories. Make sure you tag me at Niktenu Yoga or at Yin Yoga Podcast or both. Or you could send it to a yoga teacher friend. So if you have a friend that is a yoga teacher that is new to teaching Yin or just is obsessed with Yin, or even if they don't teach Yin, if there's an episode that you think is applicable, please feel free to forward an episode. I would love that. I would be grateful. Okay, today's topic is Yin Yoga is not entertainment. So before we dive into that, 2 disclaimers, my dear friends. Number 1, if you're new around these parts, I have the soul of a mermaid and the mouth of a sailor. So you can expect there could be some colorful language. So if you have small people around, just consider these adult conversations with adult language. Grab some headphones now. Also, for those of you watching on YouTube, I do have kittens that are no longer babies anymore, sad to say. They're teenagers, but they are still quite rambunctious. And one of them in particular really likes to help me, air quotes, help me podcast. And so if you're watching the video and you see me at some point like doing weird movements or like picking random kittens up, just know that could happen. Okay, so that's that. That's enough talking about that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention before we roll right into this is if you are considering doing more Yin training or your first Yin training, and you've been resonating with the perspective offered in this podcast, if it's been helpful and you've been having aha moments, then you should probably get on the wait list of my training. So at the time of this recording, it runs twice a year, in the fall and in the spring. That may change depending on when you're listening to it, but that seems to be good times of year to run it. It's all on Zoom and recorded, and you have access to the recordings for a full year. So you can go back and restudy things and go over things, because of course, no matter how skilled a teacher is, we're only going to remember so much at the time. So you have the recordings for a year. It is live on Zoom though. This is not a pre-recorded course where you can just kind of log in and noodle around and then get a certificate. No, I don't play that way. Instead, it's live. You show up, we engage face to face over the Zoom so that I can see, does anybody have questions? Is there confusion? Are there a bunch of confused faces? Are there overwhelmed faces? Are people excited? And I can answer all of your questions. So that's how the format is. It's live on Zoom. It just recently increased to being 100 hours compared to 60. Some of those hours are self-study time. So I believe it's like, I could be getting this wrong, 78 with me, and then the rest is, homework, reading, listening, etc. I could be slightly off on that, but it's around that range. So here's what happens, my friends, when you get on the wait list. So why in the world would you want to get on the wait list versus just hanging out and hoping you see it on social media when it's live? Number 1, hoping to see it on social media. Did you know that on average, only 1 to 2% of your followers actually see your posts? I know, shocking, right? So you might be thinking, I'd love to take Nick's training sometime. I'll just keep watching her social media for her to share when the registration's open. And I will share it. That doesn't mean you'll see it. But when you join the waitlist, here's what you get. You get some little nuggets along the way. So first, you'll be on the waitlist. Yay! Which means you're going to get first crack at registration. So before I start plastering it everywhere, I always email the waitlist first. You're also going to get a free head to toe yin sequence, a little PDF action for you that you can use for your classes. And you're also going to get a video practice of that same sequence that you can then experience it in your body. You're going to get these podcast episodes delivered right in your inbox so you never miss an episode. You're going to also get little sneaky peeks behind the curtain. So I have some videos that are like little samples of lessons from the training, and you'll get some of those in your inbox as well as registration kicks up. You'll get some yoga practice videos. You'll get some of my favorite music and poetry for yin classes. And you'll get invitations to join my free seasonal mini workshops, which happen quarterly. They're almost always yin themed. I don't think I've done one in a long time that isn't. And so those are free, and you'll get an invitation to join those. And you'll also get an invitation to join my paid Zoom classes. Then once registration does open, you're also going to get a first 5 people to sign up discount code. So it's not an early registration discount code where I'm going to send you emails every 2 days going, hey, this discount code's going to expire on this day. No, I don't roll like that. I got things to do. Instead, it's just going to be, here's the discount code. The first 5 of you that use it are going to save 25%. So that's how being on the wait list is a perk compared to just watching and waiting. So if you know at some point in the future, whether it's this year, next year, or 2 years from now, you want to do my training, please get yourself on the wait list. You can start taking advantage of all those little perks on the way to registration opening. And there is a link in the show notes that says, cleverly, get on the wait list. You can click that and it will take you to the wait list. All right. So for those of you, the theme that I don't know if I'm not alone in this, I'm sure, but the way my brain works is when words come in, music also comes in. And some of you may not be old enough to remember a little song by Nirvana. But this is the one that pops into my head for this episode. It's called Smells Like Teen Spirit. And there's a little section there that says, very brief, it says, here we are now, entertain us. And sometimes I feel like here we are now, entertain us is how yoga students and maybe even yoga teachers feel about their yoga classes. But dear yin teacher that's listening, yin yoga is not entertainment. It's not. Now, should we always hopefully be learning and growing as a teacher and as a practitioner and practicing and exploring? Of course. But this need to feel like you're going to have to keep things always different every time in your class. This is what we're going to talk about today. All right. So first, I want to mention that there is a certain kind of yoga student that is quite rampant right now. They're what I will affectionately call the vinyasa bunnies. You know the ones, and you may be one. Don't get me wrong. I love my movement yoga too. Not as much as I love my yin, but I do love it. But I'm not a vinyasa person. But you know the vinyasa bunnies, the ones that absolutely love vinyasa flow, the more like asymmetrical, creatively sequenced, pump and playlist type of yoga class, the better for them. So those are the people that I'm calling the vinyasa bunnies. And the vinyasa bunnies can find, if you as a teacher are not skillful at guiding them, they can find yin yoga, air quotes, boring. I know, crazy but true. I remember one time reading a review. I teach at only one studio here locally at the time of this recording. It's a very special place. I don't usually love teaching for others. I prefer to run my own show, but this is a very special studio and it's called Ma, if anyone's local, or if you're visiting, come to my class. It's called Ma. And I remember I was mentoring a teacher and she had sent me a screenshot of a review of her yoga class on Mind Body and was feeling down in the dumps because somebody had some not even constructive feedback. And I said to her, why are you looking at the reviews of your yoga classes after you teach? And again, she's a new teacher, being hard on herself. And she's like, you don't look at the reviews of your classes? I was like, no, I never have. I have good feedback. I get testimonials from people, but I don't go log on after my class into the mind body situation and see if anyone's left me reviews. Never even occurred to me to do so. But I did because she just brought it up. And I got a lot of good reviews. But of course, there was the one, there's always the one. She said that the class was almost identical from week to week, that she'd been to 3 classes and they were almost identical. And that I even used some of the same words or scripts in my class. And I couldn't help but laugh because only a vinyasa bunny would think that every single class should be different. First of all, I will say in the OG yin asanas, so if you look at Paul's book, you're going to see there's very few poses in there. Now, those of us like myself that have been teaching this for a long time and are senior teachers have added many shapes to the yin experience. So there's a lot more now, especially things for upper body. And, I've added some extra twists and some extra back bends and things like that. But it is a more limited practice as far as the poses go. So yeah, odds are, if I'm getting you to do something for your hip flexors in a class, I'm going to have 1 to 3 options. So there's probably going to be some repeat. So yeah, that was feedback that I got. And I just laughed and it was like, yep, there's going to be repetition. And there's 2 choices as a teacher when you get feedback like that. You can, first of all, I always look at feedback to see how valid is it. If they've said something and it's not something that I'm aware of that I'm doing, and I actually do think that taking their advice would be an improvement to my class, I absolutely will. But the class being boring, too much repetition, no. I use mindfulness in my practice when I teach. Mindfulness has some areas that are going to repeat. And I'll give you a little secret here, my friends. Now, yoga teachers don't realize this when we're trying so hard to be the sparkly showboat of yoga classes, that actually repetition is more soothing to your student's nervous system. When someone is in a state of dysregulation, which I would argue that most of the world is, having consistency actually helps them to shift from their fight, flight, or freeze response and into their parasympathetic or the relaxation response. So then the question goes, where do we draw that line between I'm doing exactly the same sequence, which I do not do, by the way, and there's going to be some repetition here because there's only so many poses. And I also try to teach really accessibly. So I do tend to favor certain hip openers over others because I know most of my students, especially the ones not at the studio, I know them quite well. And I know who's got knee issues. And so rather than mess around with like 5 different options that people can't do anyway, I'm going to just give them the one I know they can all do, with the invitation for them to choose a different option if they would like. So I got a comment like that from a Vinyasa bunny. That's one of the reasons that, I did the first episode on Yin Yoga being boring, how to keep classes inspiring. And then recently in my teacher training, one of the teacher trainees made a comment that we were comparing and contrasting heart melting to fish pose on blocks. So supported fish on blocks, so not on a bolster. And I was saying that if I have a choice in my sequence, I'm going to take supported fish on blocks, hands down, any day of the week, because it opens up those areas that I'm looking for more effectively, but it's also more accessible. That there's a big percentage of the population that can't do heart melting pose because of limitations in their shoulder when they reach their arms up overhead. And so they would just be struggling in that shape. And yeah, you can do the half version and you can give props and all that. Or I could just flip them on their back and give them supported fish on blocks. But she had said having these other options, of course, keeps class, what did she say, interesting, or keeps the students from getting bored. And I said, Yin Yoga is not entertainment, right? I am not Netflix. I am not Disney. I'm not here to entertain you in your yoga class. What I am here to do is to hold brave space for you. I have an episode on that as well with the lovely Grace. All of these episodes, by the way, there's a document in the show notes that says all episodes at a glance. That's a Google Doc that lists literally every episode with a link. So if you are new to the pod and you want to binge, that's a great way to do it. Or if you're just like, there was a topic and I want to look and see if it's there, it's all in that Google Doc. So you can access all of them there. So my job is to skillfully guide a practice that serves the needs of most of the people in the room to the best of my ability, and to hold brave space for them for whatever may come up during that practice. That's my job. It's not to entertain you. I'm not a rock star. And so I think this idea that we have, first of all, it's twofold. Sometimes this idea that we have that we need to entertain our students is our own pressure we're putting on ourselves. Or maybe we as a teacher are bored of our sequences. Well, then absolutely switch them up if you want to. But just acknowledge that it's you that's bored, not your students. Right. So sometimes we transfer our boredom or our feeling of being predictability on the students when actually they're quite content to just keep going along as they have been with their favorite poses. And it's us that is feeling like we need to mix it up a little. So first of all, acknowledge, is it really that the students are bored or is it you? And then if it is that the students are bored, again, there are many more poses now available to us than were when I first started training with Paul. The repertoire of poses that Paul has is actually quite small. It's like basic shapes with many variations for different body types, but it didn't even include upper body. I think the last time I trained with him, they introduced one thing for our necks. And I've done a whole episode on upper body yin, so I won't get into that too much. But if you're looking at these books and you're like, shit, there's not a lot here to choose from, well, then of course you're going to have repetition. And repetition is not bad. However, also, there are many more poses that have been added on by other yin teachers over the years. I talked a whole bunch about that in the upper body yin episode. So I'm not going to get into kind of how I came to that and all that. Just know that when I train teachers, you're not only going to get the poses that were originally in Paul's book. There's a whole bunch more that I go into. So it does leave me some room for creative expression. I have several upper body poses. I have a few hip openers. I have an additional twist or two, a few extra back bends that were not in my original training. So I can definitely choose things and keep the sequences a little more fresh. But also, so with that said, as a teacher, again, it's not my job to entertain the students. If a vinyasa bunny comes in and they're disappointed because we only did a few poses and we held them a long time, well, that's just yin. So there you go. Or if they feel like, oh, we did some of the same poses this week that I did last time I came here. Yep, that's going to happen too. Did you know there are whole styles of yoga where you do the same series over and over and over again until you actually get good at it, and then you move to the second series and et cetera? It's called Ashtanga. So it's not like, which is interesting because the current vinyasa phenom, I guess you could call it, in North America is actually based on Ashtanga yoga. It's just, and so was power yoga. Both of them were based on Ashtanga yoga and then just taken away and run with as far as sequencing and letting go of some of the rules. And I'm not defending the Ashtanga tradition sequence. I don't actually love the whole primary, secondary, third series, et cetera, system, simply because due to my own bone structure, I can't do shoulder stand well. And so like I never would have ever been able to move on in other poses that I could do comfortably with facility, simply because I hadn't completed that first series. So it's not really a system that I admire per se, But I'm just pointing out that it is out there and that there are thousands and thousands of yoga teachers and students doing exactly the same sequence again and again and again. And it happens in hot yoga too. It's the same, 26 poses over and over again. So I say this, dear yin teachers, so that you don't feel like it's only yin that does this like repeat of poses thing. No, there's whole styles of yoga where you never get any variety whatsoever, and people love them. And they're probably more grounding to their nervous system because they know what's coming, right? It's easier to fall into this relaxed state in your nervous system again if you know what is coming up. So I wanted to mention that. And that, again, it's not our job to entertain our students. Now, what you could do, and what I would do, had that person come up to me before the class or with verbal feedback after the class versus written on an app and, no way to respond there. If they had come up and said, I'm finding that this practice is kind of boring, like it's like the same poses and you say some of the same things and blah, 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 I would have said, yes. Because the point of this practice is not the shapes. It's not these funny shapes that we're making with our body. And then I would have had an aha as to the state of mind of that student. And I could have more skillfully with my words guided them to all of the wonderful things about a yin practice that don't happen in a movement-based practice simply because you're moving too quickly. And the first one that I'll highlight is interoception. There's also been an episode on that, interoception. For those of you who don't want to listen to the whole episode, interoception, I'm going to just give a very layperson definition, is an awareness of what's happening inside your body. Well, that's actually pretty dang hard to do in a vinyasa class because you're moving so quickly until shavasana, right? Or until there's a still pose. So that's one of yin yoga's secret superpowers, is this gift of interoception. Because we come into the shape and we're in there for minutes at a time, it gives me as a practitioner or me as a teacher an opportunity to guide people as to what is happening in your body. There's this whole inner landscape inside of you that most people do not even explore at all. And so it does take some skill as a teacher to explain that and perhaps to offer some prompts as to how people can get more in touch with what is happening inside of them and less focused on this sort of fluff of like, how many warrior flow sequence chaturanga surprises did I have in this class? Now, what might actually be surprising is when you sit still and quiet for a few minutes, how hard it is for you to notice the sensation in your hamstring for minutes at a time. So it's not that there's nothing going on in a yin practice. It's not that a yin practice is boring. It's not even that a yin practice can't be entertaining, but it does require a more inward experience. And I would argue a more mature, and I don't mean age-wise, I just mean personality type, way of looking at the practice. Now, that being said, if somebody doesn't have that maturity, you can still coach them on that when you're in your class. So, for example, mindfulness. I will guide my students through a guided mindfulness. And the intention of that is to try to bring them into this place of leaving the outside world and this outer experience of the yoga practice and into their own body. And so we notice things like we start with sounds around us, then we notice the air in our skin, then we notice the weight of the body on the earth and sensations there, and then we notice breath and we start to become aware of sensations. So I'm intentionally using my words and this guided mindfulness experience to pull them from the sort of external to the internal, to what's happening in their body. And then when they're in the practice, I'm also going to guide those cues. I'm going to say things like come to 50 to 60% of the most you could do. Well, guess what? You can't do that unless you're paying attention to what's happening inside your body, right? And then even cues like, I'm sharing cues because I know that a lot of you teachers will be like, yeah, okay, we get it, we're on board, but like, what the hell do I say? So another thing that I like to say often is notice how the sensation is in your body. And if you could describe it to somebody who's not in the room practicing or not doing this pose right now, how would you do that? Would it be a word, a light, a shape, a color, a sound? How would you describe this sensation? Is the sensation the same right now as it was when we first came into this pose? And what about now? Or now? Or how about now? And if you track the sensation with your mind's eye, if you get curious and observant, do you notice that it changes over the time that we're here from beginning to the end? Does the sensation feel different on your inhale versus your exhale? Oftentimes it does. So I can cue them to do that. I could ask them to notice if there's any stories or opinions that are coming up in the mind about the sensation they're feeling in their body. So you see how I just took them from this flashy, sparkly showboat, vinyasa bunny, here I am now, entertain me, give me a super complicated sequence that's all on one side before I switch to the other. And let's put a bunch of chaturangas and downward dogs in between each one too while we're at it. I took them from that sort of expectation, which is all very external. What shapes am I making with my body? In what order? How predictable are they? What fun things did you throw in that I've never tried before? I'm taking them away from that into the entertainment, if you want to call it that, being what the hell is happening inside your body and inside your mind and your emotions. So it's not that there isn't things to notice in a yin practice, dear teacher. There is plenty to notice, but you may have to guide them to those. And you can't necessarily know who needs to be guided to those and who doesn't. So I don't mention all of the things that I just said to you in every class because I want to work my way into a quiet practice. I always do the guided mindfulness. I might pick one or two of the other things that I said to guide them into. And this really just goes on instinct based on what I'm observing in the room. You know, I do a check-in at the beginning of class to see if anyone's new to yin. And if nobody has said that they're new to yin, and I do that by just getting everyone to, when they're lying down, put one hand on their belly if they're new to yin. And if no one's new to yin, but they're still bored, there's no way I could know that. So, you know, certainly didn't beat myself up over the fact that a student was bored, that she came to 3 classes and oh my God, we repeated some of the poses in those 3 classes. Now, had I known, of course, that she was having that experience, I could have spoken to it. I could have explained that sometimes there's a little bit of a perspective shift when we start practicing yin. And if we're used to, if our expectations are this sort of vinyasa bunny class, this like really interesting flow class with a pump and jammin' playlist and all these unpredictable transitions, but yet with the predictability, of course, of chaturangas and downward dogs in between, because God forbid we transition in any other way. If that's what someone's expecting, and I know that, then I can speak to it, right? Then I can say that actually the attention is a little bit more subtle and a little bit more inward in yin, but that it's just as rich, and I might argue more important. Because when our students take the time to be still and quiet and curious about what's going on with them, they're bound to have insights into their own experience, whether that be into their thoughts. You know, I had a friend who was a very seasoned meditator, had done tons of long meditation retreats. So she was very aware of the fact that when she sat still and quiet, her mind would act up. But she was an Ashtanga yogi. And so she was used to moving through the poses at a more quick pace. And when she did a yin class, she said to me, I could not believe how hard that was because my mind was just going the whole time. I was sitting in the poses and it was like thinking. So even somebody who's got a very seasoned meditation practice and knows about this tendency of our mind to do all this chatter and, you know, the soap operas and the circuses that our mind takes us on, even somebody who was very seasoned meditator and knew that still found yin challenging because she had to shift her mindset from, instead of my mind focusing on the movement, I now have to focus on what comes up in the stillness. So I'm going to say that one more time. Instead of my mind focusing on the movement, my mind is now having to shift gears to focus on what is happening in the stillness. That doesn't mean that there's not plenty happening. So, all of this interoception can be challenging for people. And this is why Yin Yoga is not an easy practice. It takes a lot of patience and persistence and willingness to sit in your stuff, whether that's sensations in your body or mental, emotional stuff or boredom, all of it. And I would argue that actually boredom is probably a common part of a yin practice. However, dear teacher, that does not mean that you need to stop your students from being bored, because boredom is part of the practice. So you do not need to feel like you always need to have a totally different sequence with totally different poses than you did in the last 3 months. Well, first of all, good luck with that, because there's only so many poses. You can only string them together in so many orders. You can get creative, of course. So first of all, be realistic with your expectations. Secondly, understand that actually some repetition is actually really good for your students' nervous system, and that there are whole styles of yoga out there that are repetitive, right? So the Ashtanga tradition, there's a primary series, then there's another series, then I can't remember how many there are, 4 or something. And those are the same poses over and over again. This is how we learn. Repetition is how we learn. And it's also better for our nervous system. Also, Bikram yoga, same thing, same poses. Now, I'm not necessarily in love with either of those styles of yoga myself for my own practice. They're not suitable for me in what I need, but I'm just saying that there are whole styles of yoga out there that have a predictable sequence that they go through every single time. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe there's a lot of repetition in the Shivananda tradition as well. I can't say for sure because I've never studied it in depth, but just from what I've seen. So somewhere in some students' heads, they get this idea that every class is supposed to be entertaining and it's supposed to be this fun, magical adventure, this sparkly showboat of really cool transitions that they never have done before, of course, but always with chaturangas and downward dogs in between, because we can't leave those out. And if that's their expectation, then yeah, yin is going to feel a little boring for them, but it is not your job to entertain them. Yin yoga is not entertainment. I would argue, in fact, that all yoga is not entertainment, but some of it more easily caters to the people who think that yoga should be entertaining. And that hopefully you've gotten some tips as a teacher on ways that you can talk about the differences in yin from other styles of yoga. It's not just as simple as that's a movement style, this is a stillness style. Yes, this is true. But also, what are all the other aspects that are different? Proprioception is what you really focus on in movement styles of yoga, which is like, where is my body in space? Proprioception, right? So if you're standing at the front of your mat and your teacher says, step your foot back to a high lunge, knowing where the hell the back of your mat is and where your foot is in space and getting it to land there, movement forms of yoga are really good for that, for proprioception. That's called proprioception. But Yin's secret magical superpower is interoception, an awareness of what is happening inside of us, which could be breath, thoughts, sensations, feelings, emotions, all of it. And this is where Yin Yoga really shines. And I would argue that unless that student thinks that they're a boring person and that their felt, lived, moment-to-moment experience is boring, then how could they not be entertained by all the things happening within them? However, it might take you as the teacher to just shift that paradigm a little bit. If somebody's used to moving, going, and all of the kind of fancy, fun transitions and, super loud music that they can sing along to, and if that's their experience, and then they come into your yin class, and maybe there's a little bit of atmospheric music or no music at all even, and they're just asked to be like lying still and quiet. And there's a lot less poses because we're holding them longer. So that means there's less variety, and they're not being entertained by you talking the whole time. It might be helpful to point that out, that this practice is very different in these key ways. However, here's where our mind can pay attention to this inner experience, this inner landscape. How does my body feel? Where is the sensation? What does the sensation feel like? Does it change over time? What is my mind telling me about this? Are there emotions coming up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So there's so much opportunity for a rich experience in a yin practice, but it's an inward experience. It's more interoception. And yin yoga is not entertainment, nor should it be, nor should you feel pressured. So I hope this is helpful for any of you who do have those kind of vinyasa or power bunnies that come into your class and show up with that attitude of the Nirvana song that is playing in my head of here we are now, entertain us. Remember, dear teacher, it's not your job to be entertaining. It's not your job. Yin yoga is definitely not entertainment. Your job is to skillfully create a class that works for the majority of the people in the room, and to hold brave space and to guide them to the subtler, more quiet aspects of a yin practice that they might be missing if they're all up in their head, focused on the fact that they're still in this pose and that they're bored. And even explaining that boredom is part of the process could be a valuable thing. So I hope that's helpful, dear teacher. Take the pressure off yourself. Yin yoga is not entertainment. Hopefully you've also gotten some tips for when you can see those vinyasa bunnies twitching out in their poses, and you've got some ideas on ways that you can address or guide them into the other aspect of yoga practice, which is this internal experience. And I would love to know in the comments your feedback on this. So if you're on Spotify, there's a comment feature. If you're on YouTube, there's a comment feature. Also, if you are watching or listening to this on my blog, which lives on my website, there's a comment feature. So if this has sparked something in you, I would love to know, did you ever feel this way about yin yourself? Especially those of you that were first vinyasa bunnies who have now transitioned over to yin. What helped you with this transition from here I am now, entertain me, to this more subtle, quiet practice? Or what other teaching tips do you have that you could share with everybody about getting people to stop viewing this as entertainment and instead as a deep part of their healing journey, and dare I even say, perhaps their spiritual practice? All right, let me know. And until next time, my friends, bye for now.